Okay. In the final weeks of his life, Eric Richins began changing financial documents inside his own home, not at a lawyer's office, not after a formal consultation. Inside the house where his wife was sleeping, where his 3 sons were growing up, where breakfast happened every morning like nothing was wrong. Something had reached him, some signal he could not fully name, and he started moving, but he did not move fast enough. On the morning of March 4th, 2022, Eric Richins went to bed and never woke up. The question that detail leaves behind is this: how close did he come? That question has an answer. It is buried in the trial record, and it changes everything about how this case feels when you know it. Here is what almost no coverage has stopped to examine. The attempt that killed Eric Richins was not the first one. There was a prior attempt, inside the same house, on the same man, while his 3 sons were living under that roof. At the time, people around him called it a stomach illness. Looking back, through everything investigators later uncovered, that prior episode was not a stomach illness. It was a rehearsal, and Eric Richins survived it without ever knowing what it actually was. His youngest son was 5 years old when his father died. Weston has never known a complete version of his family. Every birthday he has celebrated, every school year he has finished, every normal morning he has ever woken up to, all of it has happened entirely inside the aftermath of that one morning. He did not lose a family he remembers. He lost the version of his life he never got to find out about. That gets heavier the longer you sit with it. Right now, somewhere inside the Utah State Correctional Facility, Kouri Richins is waking up to the same mountain range she once drove through freely on her way to real estate appointments, to client meetings, to the daily movements of a life that no longer exists for her. The mountains have not moved, the glass has not changed, but the windows do not open, and neither does the door attached to her name. She stood in that courtroom and told her boys she was coming home. Her legal team has filed an appeal. She is fighting to overturn the conviction that put her there. But that conviction was not built on speculation. It was not built on circumstance. It was built, in part, on the paper trail Eric Richins created in the final weeks of his life, trying to protect himself from a threat he could feel, but could not yet name. He was trying to survive. The record he left behind trying is what sealed the case against her. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what Eric Richins knew in those final weeks. Exactly what Kouri Richins is waking up to every morning inside that facility, and exactly what his youngest son said when the court finally gave him the floor. You will also understand what she is actually fighting to overturn, and why the paper trail Eric left behind does not disappear no matter what her attorneys file. If you are new here, this is Case Break Network. We break cases. We follow every lead. Hit subscribe right now because what we are about to walk through is not covered this way anywhere else. Let's get into it. The house in commas sat in Summit County, Utah, a small mountain community near Park City where the air is cold and clear even in early March, and where the kind of life the Richins family appeared to have from the outside looked, from the road, exactly like everything was working. Eric Richins went to bed on the night of March 4th, 2022, after sharing a drink with his wife to celebrate something at work the next morning, and he never found out what it was. When toxicology results came back, they confirmed fentanyl in Eric's system at approximately 5 times the recognized lethal dose. Not at the threshold, not twice it, 5 times. Forensic toxicologists have been consistent across multiple high-profile cases in establishing that a fentanyl level at multiples of the lethal dose carries one meaning in an investigative context: deliberate administration. That quantity does not appear in accidental exposure cases. It does not appear in recreational use cases gone wrong. It communicates intent before any other evidence is considered. That number told investigators what they needed to know before they had asked a single other question. And this is where it gets complicated, because what almost no coverage has examined clearly enough is that this was not the first time. There was a prior attempt inside the same house, on the same man, while Carter, Ashton, and Weston were living under that roof. Eric had become severely ill on a prior occasion, sick enough to alarm the people around him. He recovered. At the time, it was called a stomach illness. Nobody treated it as a crime scene. The house kept running. Breakfast kept happening. Youth soccer practice kept arriving on weekends. Eric Richins had already survived an attempt on his life without ever knowing what it actually was. So let us slow down here for a moment, because what the toxicology and the prior attempt together establish is not just a pattern, it is a timeline. The first dose was insufficient. She stayed. She waited. The second was 5 times the lethal level. That correction is not the behavior of someone acting in a moment of impulse or rage. That is the behavior of someone who learned from a failure and tried again, with everything already prepared. While that was happening, Eric had started noticing something was wrong. He found discrepancies in their shared financial accounts and real estate dealings. He began changing documents. He started moving assets. He was not doing this from a lawyer's office. He was doing it quietly, inside his own home, acting on an instinct he could not yet name. What is not fully clear from the trial record is exactly how far he got, how much he had uncovered, how close he was to having enough to act on, and that gap may never be completely filled. What investigators did find was a documented pattern of financial fraud that ran for years. Forged documents, manipulated real estate transactions, and life insurance policies taken out on Eric without his knowledge. He had not signed them. He did not know they existed. She did. Then on May 8, 2023, while Summit County investigators were pulling financial records and building a homicide case, Kouri Richins sat in front of a morning television camera and talked about grief. The book she published 2 months earlier was titled Are You With Me? A grief guide for children coping with the loss of a parent, dedicated to Eric. She gave the interviews. She said the words. The cameras rolled, and not one person in that studio knew what investigators already had in their files. What is strange about this is not that she maintained composure. People process grief in ways that look nothing like what we expect. What is strange is that she did not avoid the cameras. She sought them. She booked the interviews. She chose to be seen, publicly, as a grieving mother, while investigators were actively building the case. Nobody covered that decision clearly enough, and it is the detail that stopped investigators cold. The morning show host smiled across the table at her, and the cameras rolled, and somewhere inside the Summit County Sheriff's Office, investigators were looking at the same financial records they had been pulling for weeks. She was arrested May 8, 2023, charged with aggravated murder and 5 counts of distribution of a controlled substance. The conviction she is now fighting to overturn was not built on one piece of evidence or one decision made in a single moment. It was built on years of documented choices, fraud, insurance policies, a prior attempt, and a fentanyl dose that left investigators no interpretive room. But there is one thing her attorneys cannot appeal, and it did not come from investigators. It came from her own sons. But before we go any further, there is something in the trial record that no coverage has examined with enough stillness. 3 boys were given a formal moment to put their truth on the record. No attorneys shaped the language. No one reviewed it for courtroom strategy. They wrote what they were carrying, and what Weston wrote, at 9 years old, is the detail this entire case has been moving toward. Before we get there, we need to go back to the beginning, to who this case is actually about. Start here. One detail that should not matter, but does. That detail should not matter, but it does. Because Eric Richins was not a man who missed what was happening around him. He was a man whose instincts were right, whose timing was close, and who still did not make it. There is a particular kind of grief that belongs to people who almost got there. Eric Richins was that close. Here is what the full picture actually looks like, in order. Kouri Richins took out life insurance policies on Eric without his knowledge. Eric did not sign them. He did not know they existed. That is worth noting, but it does not end there. While those policies were active, Eric started finding discrepancies. He began moving assets, changing documents, acting on something he could feel but could not yet name. He was not reacting to a confrontation. He was protecting himself quietly, inside his own home, from a threat that had already tried to kill him once, without him ever knowing it, because the first attempt had already happened. Inside that house, while his boys were living there, people around him called it a stomach illness. It was not. And between the first attempt and the second, she did not withdraw. She did not create distance. She stayed inside the marriage, inside the daily routine, and she waited. Everything was already prepared. The timing was chosen. Then came the fentanyl level, 5 times the recognized lethal dose. We know what that number means. Forensically, that quantity has one consistent meaning. It does not appear in accident cases. It does not appear in recreational use gone wrong. As forensic toxicology research has consistently established, a dose at that multiple of the lethal threshold communicates deliberate intent. It is a quantity chosen specifically to ensure there was no recovery, no gray area, no alternative explanation. That number closed the interpretive door before investigators had walked through it. And then, 2 months before her arrest, she sat in front of a television camera and talked about grief, about helping children heal, about the loss her family had experienced. She did it while investigators were pulling her financial records. She did it while the case was being built. She booked the interviews herself. When you look at that full timeline, the insurance policies, the financial fraud running for years, the prior attempt inside the family home, the 5 times lethal dose, and then the children's book published in the months between Eric's death and her arrest, what is the detail you keep coming back to? Drop it in the comments. Because there is one part of this case that people land on differently, and I want to know where you land. The case against Kouri Richins was not built on a single moment. It was built on a pattern, sustained over years, documented across financial records, real estate transactions, insurance filings, and a toxicology result that left no room for interpretation. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours. 3 hours for a case that had taken investigators years to build. When the verdict came back on every count, it reflected exactly what the evidence had been pointing toward from the morning Eric was found unresponsive. The sentence was life without parole. The Utah State Correctional Facility is a modern complex on the northwest edge of Salt Lake City. 200 acres, floor-to-ceiling windows, a mountain range visible from inside the Dell building where the women's section sits. The same mountains that surround the valley she once drove through freely. The same light. She can see them every single day, but the windows do not open, and neither does the door attached to her name. The sentence is life without parole. The conviction stands. The appeal is filed. By every legal measure, the case of Kouri Richins is resolved. But the case of Carter, Ashton, and Weston Richins, that one is still running, and it has no verdict date. Eric Richins coached his son's youth soccer team on weekends. He showed up on sidelines in the cold Utah air, not as a performance of fatherhood, but as the actual center of what he was building. The house in Camas, the career in Summit County, the life that looked polished from the outside, all of it was pointed in one direction: his boys. By every account from people who knew him, he was not a man who was building a career at the expense of his family. He was building a family at the center of everything else. Kouri Richins was not a stranger to her community. She was a fixture in it, a licensed agent operating in one of Utah's most competitive markets, a visible mother, a woman whose name people in Summit County knew. She appeared at school events, she hosted, she showed up. Nothing in her public-facing life before the arrest indicated what investigators would later find in her financial records. That is not a defense. It is the detail that makes the sustained deception more difficult to process, not less. How does someone who, by every external measure, appeared to be a devoted mother sustain that performance across years of active fraud and a prior poisoning attempt without a single visible fracture? That question does not have a clean answer. But here is what the record does answer. Carter, Ashton, and Weston Richins have been living with their Aunt Katie Richins Benson, Eric's sister, and Uncle Clint Benson since Kouri's arrest in May 2023. Katie and Clint became the boys' legal guardians and have been managing the full reality of daily life for those 3 children, through the arrest, through the trial, through the verdict, and through the sentencing. For more than 2 years before May 13, 2026, all contact between Kouri and her sons was not limited. It was blocked. She was calling into silence every single day from inside Summit County Jail. The people who would need to authorize any future contact between Kouri and her boys are the same people who blocked that contact from the beginning. Dr. Craig Haney, professor of psychology at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and the country's leading researcher on long-term incarceration, has established across decades of published research that the removal of forward orientation, the belief that today's choices connect to a different tomorrow, is the most psychologically devastating aspect of a life without parole sentence, more damaging long-term than physical conditions of confinement. The appeal Kouri Richins filed is not just a legal strategy. In the framework Dr. Haney's research describes, it may be the only psychological exit still available to her. At sentencing, she stood at the podium and spoke for 30 minutes. She told the court she calls her sons every single day, even when the calls do not connect, even when no one answers, even when the line goes through to nothing. She said she does it so her boys know she is thinking of them. She said she was coming home. She said it with full conviction, in front of a judge, in front of prosecutors, in front of Eric's family, in front of cameras carrying her words to every outlet covering the case. Eric Richins built a real estate career from the ground up in one of Utah's most competitive markets, and built it into something real enough that it was worth years of fraud to take from him. Carter was 9 years old when it ended, old enough to remember every detail of the morning everything changed, old enough to carry it into a courtroom 4 years later, and old enough to write, in his own words, that he does not miss his old life. Her sons had already answered her. Carter, now 13, said he does not miss his old life. He does not miss Kouri. Ashton, now 11, said she took everything from him and his brothers. He said he would not feel safe if she were ever released. And then there is Weston. Weston was 5 years old when his father died. He is 9 now. Every year of his school life, every year he has spent learning to read, making friends, growing up, has happened entirely inside the aftermath of March 4, 2022. When he was given his formal moment to speak to the court, with a judge listening and the record open, he did not ask for a phone call. He did not reach toward her in any direction. He said that if she ever got out, he would be scared. He would be angry. He would not want to go near her. Then he said what he actually wanted. He wants her in jail forever. No attorney shaped those words. No one reviewed them for courtroom strategy. A 9-year-old boy wrote what he was carrying, trusted his therapist to carry it into that room, and put it on the permanent record. This is Case Break Network. We break cases. We follow every lead. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because we do not stop at the verdict. We follow every lead, including the ones still unfolding long after the cameras leave. Hit subscribe now. Kouri Richins told that courtroom she was coming home. Her attorneys filed the appeal, but the conviction they are fighting was built, in part, on a paper trail created by the man she poisoned, inside the house where his sons were growing up, in the final weeks of his life. Eric Richins was trying to protect what was his. What he left behind trying may be what makes the appeal impossible to win. The Utah State Correctional Facility sits on the northwest edge of Salt Lake City, and on a clear morning the Wasatch Range is visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Dell Building, the same mountains that surround Camas, where Eric Richins coached youth soccer on weekends and built a life pointed entirely toward his boys. Carter was 9 when it ended. Ashton was 7, Weston was 5, and not one of them had any say in a single thing that happened to their family between March 4, 2022 and May 13, 2026. Kouri Richins maintains her innocence, and somewhere inside the distance between a jury's verdict and a person's internal truth, There is a space that belongs only to her. One no sentence, no appeal, and no documentary can fully reach. The steps Eric Richins took to protect himself, the documents he changed, the assets he moved, the instinct that finally told him something was wrong inside his own house, may be the thing that makes the appeal impossible to win. Because Eric Richins could not finish what he started. But the record he made trying is now part of what keeps Kouri Richins inside that cell. He was trying to save himself. What he left behind trying may be what finally holds the case. It is early morning in Kamas, Utah. The Wasatch Range is still dark at the edges. Eric Richins has somewhere to be. Something at work that was worth a drink the night before, worth the anticipation of a Tuesday morning in March. His sons are in their rooms. The house is quiet the way houses are quiet before a day begins. He has documents he has been working through. He has a career he built from the ground up in one of Utah's hardest markets. He has 3 boys who will be at soccer practice by the weekend, and a father who intends to be on that sideline. He never woke up. Weston Richins was 5 years old when his father died. He is 9 now. He has never known a morning that was not shaped by what happened on March 4th, 2022. When the court gave him his moment, he used it to say he wants her in jail forever. I want to know, when you think about those 3 boys building their lives in their aunt and uncle's home, carrying 2 losses across 2 separate dates, what do you think justice actually looks like for Carter, Ashton, and Weston? Because the legal verdict has landed. But that question does not have a clean answer. Drop it in the comments. If this case matters to you, if Eric's story matters to you, share this video. Subscribe to Casebreak Network. Breaking cases, following every lead. Because the people who never had a choice in any of this deserve every lead followed, every detail examined, and every record put where it belongs. Eric Richins was trying to protect his boys and everything he built for them. And the morning he never woke up, those boys lost the only parent who was not going to take everything from them.